So thank you for joining us today, everyone. Welcome. This is our next webinar, Being a Leader in a Crisis. My name's Lucy. I'm the Operations Manager at Fine Company. I'll be the moderator today, so if you've got any questions at all, just put them into the chat box and we'll go through as many as we can at the end of the webinar. I'll hand you over to Dan shortly. I think we can get started, Dan. Is that okay?
Yeah, good.
Perfect.
Great. Well, thank you for the introduction, Lucy. I'm Dan. I see there's a few names that are on board that I recognise. So hello to everyone I know and hello to new people. This is the second in our series of webinars. So across the group, the Hive and Fine Company group, we're running a series of webinars to help support the dental industry through this crisis. Ross did one last week. Our strategy across the group has been to work on stabilise, protect and regenerate. So Ross's webinar last week was on stabilise and protect. So it's about understanding the downside and marking what the financial burden is going to be during this time of closure, and then starting to look about how to re-engineer your business coming out the other side. Today, we're looking very much at the regenerate phase. So being a leader during a crisis. The funny thing is, actually, in terms of principles, very little changes about leadership. So I'm not going to be able to give you a tick box exercise. These are the 5 things you need to do as a leader in your business to deal with the crisis. Hopefully what I'm going to be able to give you is an overview for the way you should be looking at leadership and how you can use this time, this kind of unheard of amount of time, to work on personal development and leadership development, and actually come back better from it. So today I'm really going to talk about purpose and understanding your purpose as a leader, and then giving you an overview on how to implement change in your organisation. And hopefully I'm going to give you a bit more context about how leadership has worked within dentistry and wider business historically, and how I think you need to develop it going forward. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is actually what was happening in dentistry leading up to this. So as we're all aware, there was a huge boom in dentistry. So from 2013 to 2019, the GDP spend on dentistry grew by 80%. So what that means is that growth didn't come from the NHS, it didn't come from general private dentistry, it came from high value treatments. So there was a huge increase in market demand. And for dentists to meet that demand, it was fairly straightforward. Marketing systems didn't need to be that sophisticated. They simply needed to open their doors, have a website and welcome people in. And there was radical growth across the board. So it was quite straightforward to find income as a dentist, and that income kind of manifested itself as paying everyone quite well and creating good profit. So what that meant was certain things sometimes got overlooked in dentistry. So a very basic one, commerciality. Sometimes businesses weren't truly profitable, and that's very much what Ross's webinar was about last week. And a big area to get overlooked was leadership. And I think it's because by its nature, leadership's quite an abstract topic, and it hasn't got a precise definition. A Chief Court Justice in a very famous lawsuit in America on obscenity said, with obscenity, I can't tell you what obscenity is, but I know it when I see it. It's kind of the same with leadership. We know it when we see it, but if you give me a precise definition of it, it's quite difficult. So it's something you have to be working on, reflecting on, learning about and thinking about constantly, and actually refine and build your own personal definition of what it means to you and how you want to operate as a leader. So yeah, it's a bit of a big challenge to fit it all into half an hour, but hopefully it will be useful for you. So what's happened is risk was kind of unseen in the dental market. There was always the option that you could just sell your practice and sell it for a pretty high price. So there wasn't really visible risk, and none of us saw this coming. We didn't know that the risk would come from a global pandemic of a virus that actually shut down the kind of global economy for a period of time and made it impossible for us to generate any cash. But it's happened, and that risk was actually always there, whether we knew it or not. So what that's done to the market is, the way I see it is there's been 4 big inversions. So whereas a month ago it was a seller's market, prices just continually were going up, and it was quite expensive to buy into a dental practice. Now I'd suggest that seller's market has changed and it's a buyer's market. Historically, the biggest limiting factor to growth was finding talented associates who wanted to come on board and be led by you and developed, and increase their growth and become good team players, because there was an undersupply and an over demand of them. Their main metric was getting as high a percentage as possible, and they were happy to switch between practices or work at multiple practices to do that. I think that's going to change slightly. Some of the bigger corporates are going to suffer and possibly close sites and possibly go bust. So I think there's going to be a massive oversupply of associate talent filling the market. So what that's going to do is it's going to give you more options for your clinical team. You can actually be more selective over the people you get, but also you can be more selective about how you choose to either employ them or what the percentage deal is they're on or what sliding scale. So you've got more options as a leader now to be thinking about what your production team in the practice is doing. Another big change is team members in general. So from receptionists to high-level business managers, it's always been a nightmare to recruit. And across the group, we've had a bit of a mantra, always be recruiting. This is because there's a certain amount of churn rate to team members, quite often to do with the fact that people are a bit more transient in their careers because we've had, historic low unemployment. So it's fairly easy to find jobs. That's going to radically change. People are going to want to keep their jobs. They're going to want to try and build careers. So it's a huge opportunity for you as a leader to actually start building an effective culture in your organization, and having team members that want to be developed. That's always been a kind of limiting factor for a lot of people, a lot of my clients I've been working with, that they have all the ideas and they want to do stuff, but essentially a lot of the team aren't there for a career. They're in there for a paycheck and want to clock in and clock out. I think there's going to be a greater level of commitment to employers going forward. And the biggest change, I think, for you guys, and relevant for this subject, is my biggest blocker with clients in getting them to work on their leadership or work on their strategy or work on the business has been time. Dentistry is an incredibly demanding job, physically and mentally. So asking someone to spend a day a week working on their business or working on their own leadership, really what people saw was that was just at the cost of the revenue generation of the business. So they'd kind of say, but Dan, if I was in surgery, I'd be making $4,000 for the business on that day. So what could I be doing that would be so valuable? So that's the problem I've been battling with. So we're at, I won't call it a nice time, but we've got a forced time of reflection, where all you can do is actually spend some time working on your leadership and working on the business. So what I'm going to do now is share with you my screen. I created a graphic which hopefully allows you to visualize the problem I was just talking about. And it gives us a bit of a context to see what's happening in the market. So we've got that on screen. Okay. So here we go. So this is called the abstraction model. And the aim of this is to show you how your time creates value to a business and when you actually get the payoff for that value. So on the vertical axis, we've got time to get paid for your activities. So at the bottom, we've got immediate, and at the top, we've got 10 years plus. So that, to be frank, that could be really any amount of time, but it's suggesting that it's a long time for you to get paid for your activities. Along the bottom axis, we've got complexity. So this is the complexity of the method or the mechanism for you to get paid for your time that you've done. And the kind of outer layer is the frontier of potential. So that's how big the opportunity is. So if we go down to the bottom left-hand corner, we have the fee generation section. So that's doing the dentistry in the practice. So if we look, the time to get paid for doing the dentistry is immediate, and the mechanism for getting paid is low complexity. So if you do a set of crowns, you do the work, you get paid immediately, and the mechanism is a simple input-output mechanism, and you get paid straight away for it. So the next layer out is slightly more complex. It's the operational layer, and the time to get paid for that is annually in profit. So this is when we start to have to create a little order out of chaos. So we have KPIs in place, reporting in place, which allows us to make proactive decisions to actually create profit towards the end of the year. So slightly more complex, and you're taking a more proactive view on creating future value rather than looking for immediate value in your pocket today. The next layer out is certainly more complex, and that's strategy. We tend to use a systems-based approach with formalization and documentation here, having frequent meetings, having clear roles and responsibilities. Again, you're trying to create order from chaos, and the time to cash return on strategic work is probably about 5 years. So if you start planning now to get the true payout, it usually takes about 5 years for any meaningful strategy to have been run. So strategy isn't really to solve today's problems, it's to create the conditions so the problems of the future can be solved. The next layer out is where it became very difficult to speak to clients about, particularly, and this was leadership and culture in their organization, because it's very difficult to trace back to any time that you spent in reflection or learning or going on a workshop to become a better leader. When you actually get the benefit from that, you know, wouldn't there be a greater benefit to the business that you actually just worked those days as a dentist and generated more revenue? So that was kind of the problem, and I found I had pretty good success with my clients, that they understood that you had to be tending to these layers because there was more opportunity the further out you were working, but it required more discipline to operate in those spaces. So we've kind of had a very strange thing that our fee generation and our operations have been knocked out from under us. So the only thing we can spend our time doing now is leadership and strategy, really. So that's kind of where I wanted to start you, to understand that whether you were doing it or not, there was a function that your business should have existed within your business. And it's now a time to get everything on track. So in order to work in these high complexity spaces and make sure that you're not kind of flip-flopping around and making sure that actually you're being productive in your thinking and your work and your conversation, you have to be focused on your purpose. So purpose first is the idea that rather than thinking about, actually what I'll say is I've heard being successful in dental business distilled down to a lot of things, and probably the kind of least exciting way I've heard it described is it's just all about bums on seats. And yeah, you know, it is important to get patients into the practice, and that's a huge part of what you'll be doing. But it is certainly about more than that. And people don't come to you to be a kind of, you know, to be a sausage in a sausage factory coming out. So why people follow you and why patients will come to you is about purpose. But it's often not the immediate thing we talk about as business owners or business leaders, because it's actually quite difficult to think about. And a chap called Simon Sinek, who I'm sure you're all, a lot of you are familiar with, came up with a really simple way of looking at it. And he wrote a book called Start With Why. So he suggests that as humans, we tend to talk about what we do. So if, you know, we're dentists, we do dentistry, rather than why we do it, what our drivers are, and why we're in business. So he'd suggest that you should always start with why. He uses the example of Apple, that Apple charge very high premiums on their products, not because they're the best technology or they talk about being the best computers or hardware or software. It's because of essentially their branding, which is all about challenging the status quo, being an individual, standing out from the crowd. And the way they do that is with cutting edge design, and what it is a computer at the end of the day. And that means that you'll pay 40% more than you would for something that'll do the same. So it is important to consider this, and it's important for you to be thinking about what your purpose is. I think the biggest risk actually coming back from this crisis is a leadership risk. I think practices that are looking to go back and think, oh, I won't think about any of that extra stuff. I just want to get things back to normal. The phrase "back to normal" should be a kind of real, a real red flag, because things aren't going to be normal. They're not going to be the same as before. And if you're always chasing how things were previously, you're destined to fail. So the Times over the weekend published that 1 in 5 dental practices will collapse. I think the practices that will collapse will be because the leader didn't want to change and wasn't embracing the change as a positive. So hopefully you can kind of understand the idea of purpose. Seneca the Younger, who's an old Stoic philosopher, said, a good man dies of events by his own colour, thus turning everything to his advantage. So unless you know what your colour is, you can't reinterpret these events and actually benefit from them. This should be a great opportunity for you to actually clear shop in your business and build a much better business. And be a much stronger leader, because you've got the luxury that you haven't had before, which is very much time. So does anyone have any questions so far? I just wanted to check. No. Okay. Right. So these handsome chaps. So the purpose piece is really important, and I think I want to offer to talk to you individually about it, about how to delve a bit deeper about that going forward. But now I wanted to give you some kind of practical overviews as to how to bring this change into your practice. So these lovely blokes are Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. So they're 2 ex-Navy SEALs who run a management consultancy business called Echelon Front. They specialize in leadership training and development and have written 2 books about it. So the books are called Extreme Ownership and The Dichotomy of Leadership. What's nice about them is they're not too prescriptive, but they give very kind of simple, straightforward overviews on how to look at things going forward. So their whole philosophy is underpinned by a concept of extreme ownership. So extreme ownership is you taking ownership for everything that happens in your organization and world. So that doesn't mean that you do everything, but you care about everything, and you try and kind of create an environment where everyone cares about everything, creating much more effective results overall. And the way they describe how to look at kind of overseeing the change and how to work through the change is using their principles of combat, which are 4 principles, which are very simple, very straightforward. But when you're starting to plan how you're going to engage the team and how you're going to be working with the team now, I think it's worth bearing in mind. So cover and move, very simple principle. So apparently it's the principle when it comes to gunfighting, but it's something that you see in any business quite a lot. That actually sometimes to take control, you have to relinquish control. So a very common thing that I have seen in practices is with something like a den plan list. So the principal, in order to create more time to run the business, sometimes doesn't want to hand over their den plan list to associates to service it, because they feel that the patients only want them to service it. And actually, in reality, there's generally very little pushback on it. So this idea of releasing control to allow someone else to take control, to allow the whole business to move forward, is really important. There's also a lot of lessons in it about to be a good leader, you also have to be a good follower. So you really need to be trying to create in your management team and across your whole organization more leaders. So you have to allow them to take control of stuff, and you have to allow them to lead you from time to time. So when you're thinking about the changes that you're going to make, how are you going to get allow these changes to happen, that it doesn't mean you have to do everything, but you're engaging the team to do it. Keep things simple. So I think hopefully we can all agree that there's been a huge information overload. I'm probably getting sent 20 articles a day on COVID-19. And if you read the Imperial College reports, they're kind of the opposite of the Oxford University reports, both very reputable institutions. but their conclusions are radically different. So there's a huge information overload at the moment, and I think that's what's causing a lot of the panic. And in order to keep things clear and keep things simple, and to get people to do things correctly, you have to take out the complexity. So as owners, we kind of want to know a few simple things. When can we reopen? What does it look like when we reopen? And how soon can we get testing? And anything else is possibly interesting, but it's not material to how we look at running the business. So equally, when you're engaging the team, you need to keep your instructions very simple. And I recommend, even if you've got furloughed team members, to stay in contact with them, not asking them to do anything, but just kind of keeping them engaged, keeping them updated of your thinking, but that's not kind of getting an article off Twitter and firing it to them to panic them. It's showing that you're in control and owning the conversation, owning the narrative, but keeping it very simple and keeping them focused on a very narrow view. So prioritize and execute. So once you've understood what your purpose is, and you start to devise a strategy and make sense of the context around you, there's obviously going to be 1,000 tasks to do. Your purpose allows you to prioritize that list. So we're all guilty of it, of getting into analysis paralysis and going, well, what if I did this first, or if I kind of jumped onto this first, but I can't do that if I don't crack on with this. This is suggesting stop messing around, mark out your priorities and execute on them immediately. So don't let anything get in the way once you've made the decision to that these are the priorities. It's very simple, it's hopefully very obvious, but it's one thing that I actually see is the big difference between really successful businesses and ones that kind of struggle to get started. If we have a board meeting and we agree our priorities, it's actually the execution piece that actually makes the difference. So as a leader, you need to be driving this kind of expectation of execution within your organization, remembering everything I'm saying, that it is going to be different for your team as well. And I think positive for you guys as well, that the team will be incentivized and engaged to actually do a better job. And they may have some awareness that a business isn't a thing that will exist forever. Hopefully your team members will understand a lot of the pain and the financial burden that you guys are going through now. And when they come back, they'll want to support the business to get back on its feet. So when you're pushing this culture of execution and accountability through your organization, I think you have more license to do it now, whereas historically there has been some issues with that because people are kind of motivated by other things and don't really want to commit to the organization. The final one is decentralized command. So this is huge across any organization. So I don't know if there's a kind of historic idea of a leader being the person at the top who makes all the decisions and takes all the responsibility and does all the planning, and that's it. So if a business is successful, it's because of them. This is really isn't the case, or shouldn't be the case in your organization. You want to, once you've mapped out what the vision for the organization is, you want to engage different segments of your team to actually do the planning. So it could be something fairly straightforward from how do we answer the telephones? I would engage your reception team to actually come back to you with what the plan is for that, rather than you writing the plan for them. Or it could be something quite complex, which is how do we run the refurbishment of the whole practice. But you want someone else to run the projects, not you. Your role as leaders is to map out the vision and allow things to happen. This is what decentralized command's about. And again, this is a huge, when this doesn't happen, it's a huge bottleneck and a limiting factor to the progression of any business. And we see it time and time again. So hopefully that's useful for you. I said in the brief that I was going to give you some ideas on where to start on your leadership journey, because as I say, there couldn't be a better time in your whole career, and it won't happen again in your whole career, well, hopefully not, where you've got this much time to actually detach and think about developing as a leader. Probably the best way of doing it is if you get in contact with me or get in contact with Lucy, and we'll just arrange a one-on-one Zoom call, so I can kind of give you some focused exercises that are kind of more specific to your situation, rather than kind of hitting it with a broad brush at the moment. So hopefully that's useful for you. I appreciate it's very short and very just a quick overview and summary. But that idea of understanding, use this time to understand what your purpose is, what your why is, why you're in business, and why you're going to come out of this stronger. It all starts from there. Everything else is kind of easier if you're anchored to a clear purpose. So does anyone have any questions at this point? Oh, just see that.
Hi, Dan. We've not actually had any questions throughout that, but I'll just give it a minute just in case anyone just want to ask anything. As Dan said, if you want to book in a consultation with Dan, then you can do it through me, or you can contact Dan directly. We'll give you the email address. We've recorded this webinar as well, so we'll send that out to you. Oh, a couple of thank yous coming through, Dan.
Good. Yeah, it was quite hard when I was preparing for this. I was there was so much I wanted to put in it, because there's so many things I find interesting about this stuff. So I've really tried to slim it down and refine it, but it's a very deep ocean once you start looking at it. So please do get in contact with me, and I'm happy to talk about this all day, but I didn't want to bore you too much.
Okay, perfect. We haven't had any other questions through, so thank you very much to everyone for joining us today. Yep, a couple more thank yous saying it was really useful. Thank you. Perfect. Lovely.
Cheers. Thank you, guys.
Bye.